We've all heard chilling stories that make us wonder, are they just fiction or is there something more? In this video, I'll share real events that happened to people and remain unexplained to this day. Get ready, because this is going to be truly terrifying. The late night drifter with the wide grin. I was driving through a deserted stretch of highway in the Midwest, somewhere between Nebraska and Wyoming. It was close to midnight, and the nearest town was about 30 miles down the road. My gas tank was nearly empty, so I pulled off at one of those rundown gas stations that look abandoned in the daytime, let alone in the dead of night. The fluorescent lights in the station's window flickered weakly. A single street lamp buzzed and cast a jittery halo on the asphalt. As I climbed out of my car, I noticed a man standing just beyond the reach of the light. At first glance, he looked ordinary. He wore a dusty plaid shirt, his hands stuffed in the pockets of some baggy jeans. But what struck me was his face. He was grinning at me, an ear-to-ear grin that showed far too many teeth. It was as if his mouth was stretched too wide, like he'd been practicing that smile for hours. I tried to ignore him, chalking it up to some lonely guy wandering around. I swiped my card, started pumping gas, and went inside the station to grab a cup of coffee to keep myself awake. The bell above the door gave a hollow jingle when I entered. The clerk looked half asleep and barely acknowledged me. I poured a lukewarm cup of coffee. Through the dusty window, I could see that same man standing near my car, still grinning. He was staring at the store's door as if waiting. I paid for the coffee and rushed outside. The man shuffled forward, still grinning. In a soft voice, he said, "You headed somewhere special?" I tried to ignore the question. Then he added, "Mind if I tag along? It gets lonely out here." His eyes didn't blink. I froze. He inched closer, and I smelled something foul on his breath, like rotting meat left out in the summer heat. I mustered a nervous laugh, mumbled something about being late, and slammed the car door shut. As I fumbled with the ignition, he pressed his face against my window. That grin never left his lips. My headlights illuminated him for just a second as I sped away, and I swear his grin seemed to widen even more, stretching across his cheeks in an unnatural way. I didn't stop again until I was well past the town. Even now, whenever I drive at night, I keep an eye on the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that wide grin illuminated by my brake lights. Footsteps in the attic. On the second night alone, I was finishing my homework in my bedroom when I heard a faint thumping noise from above me, like someone dropping a heavy box in the attic. The attic entrance was right outside my bedroom door, in the hallway ceiling. At first, I brushed it off as the house settling in the cold weather, but then I heard it again, footsteps pacing back and forth. Slow, deliberate steps. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, in a two-story house that my parents inherited from my grandfather. The house was old, with wooden floors that groaned with each footstep. One winter when I was 13, my parents had to travel for a work conference. I was left in the care of a neighbor, Mrs. G, who lived just across the road. She would check on me every evening, leave dinner in the kitchen, then remind me to lock all the doors before bed. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just my imagination. Then I heard a distinct creak. Someone was opening the attic hatch. My heart pounded. I locked my bedroom door, grabbed my phone, and called Mrs. G. Her number rang and rang, but she didn't pick up. With trembling hands, I dialed 911, whispering to the operator that someone was in my attic. The dispatcher told me to stay calm and keep the line open. Then I heard a scraping noise right outside my bedroom door. It sounded like something metallic brushing against the walls. My door handle rattled. I could see the knob twisting as if someone was trying to get in. I held my breath and pushed my dresser against the door. When the police arrived, I heard them banging on the front door and shouting. Moments later, they found me locked in my room. They checked the attic and found footprints in the dust, along with several candy wrappers and a sleeping bag near a vent that looked into my bedroom. But whoever had been up there was gone. I never found out who it was or how long they'd been watching me from that attic space. Girl at the basement window. After graduating college, I rented a small house just outside Pittsburgh. It was cozy, with a yard that backed up to a thick patch of woods. The place was old but affordable, which was perfect for my tight budget. One of the first things I noticed about the house was the old basement. It was musty, with a single tiny window level with the ground outside. The glass was permanently stained with mud. I didn't spend much time down there except to do laundry. Late one night, I trudged downstairs with a basket of clothes. The overhead bulb cast long shadows on the crumbling walls. The dryer was still running, so I leaned against an old table, scrolled through my phone, and waited. Suddenly, I felt like I wasn't alone. I glanced over at the small window. Through the smeared glass, I saw a face. It was a little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, staring in at me with wide eyes. Her face was pale, her hair stringy and tangled. She just stood there, pressed against the window, no expression, no blinking, just staring. I froze, heart pounding. For a second, I wondered if she was in trouble. But something about her eyes kept me from running outside to help. Her stare felt ... wrong. I crept forward. As I moved, she moved. I was inches away from the glass. I leaned down, trying to look into her eyes, and her lips twitched into the faintest smile. That's when the dryer buzzed loudly, making me jump. I looked away for a split second. When I looked back, she was gone. I rushed upstairs, locked all my doors and windows, and tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. The next morning, I checked outside the basement window. There were no footprints in the mud, just a single small handprint smeared on the glass from the inside of the house. The RV by the lake. One summer, a group of friends and I went camping by a small lake in upstate New York. The area was known for fishing and had a few rundown RVs parked in a campground. We found a spot in a clearing surrounded by tall pine trees. There was a rickety old RV about 50 yards away that looked like it hadn't moved in years, tires flat, windows streaked with grime. The first day was normal, grilling hot dogs, listening to music, enjoying the water. That evening, we noticed a flicker of light inside the RV. We assumed maybe someone was squatting there. Later, as we sat around our campfire, we heard a metallic banging sound coming from that direction, like someone pounding on the side of the RV. It stopped after a few minutes, so we shrugged it off and crawled into our tents. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of hushed sobs coming from near our site. I thought maybe one of my friends was sick or upset. I unzipped my tent and shone my flashlight around. That's when I saw her, a woman standing outside the RV in a ragged sundress, barefoot, her hair matted against her face. Her eyes reflected the beam of my flashlight like an animal's. She stared at me for a long moment, then shuffled backward into the shadows behind the RV. I woke my friends and 2 of them went to check on her. They found no one, but the door to the RV was ajar. Inside, it was littered with moldy blankets, half-eaten canned food, and old newspapers. Odd symbols were drawn in black marker on the walls, scrawled in frantic, looping handwriting. Suddenly, we heard a screech from outside like an animal in pain. We bolted out of the RV, hearts racing. The woman was nowhere to be found. We left at first light, telling the park ranger. He said he'd check it out, but we never heard any follow-up. Whenever I camp in isolated places now, I can't forget the sound of those sobs echoing in the dark. The townhouse next door. My sister and I rented a small townhouse in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside St. Louis. We both worked long hours, so we usually got home late. Our neighbor to the left was an older gentleman who kept to himself. The neighbor to the right was a young couple who seemed friendly enough. A few weeks after moving in, I noticed an odd smell coming from the shared wall between us and the older gentleman's unit. It was faint, like something damp or rotting. My sister noticed it too, so we wrote a polite note and slipped it under his door, asking if there was a leak or something. The next morning, the note was back under our door, blank. One night around 11 p.m., my sister and I were watching TV when we heard strange clattering sounds through the wall, like heavy furniture being dragged. Then there was a thump and a low moan. Alarmed, I went outside to knock on our neighbor's door. His lights were off, the curtains drawn. No answer. Days passed, and the smell got worse. We called the property manager, who said he'd look into it. That evening, an unmarked van pulled up and 2 men wearing gloves and dark jackets let themselves into the neighbor's townhouse with a set of keys. They were in there for hours. We heard more scraping, more dragging, and a sudden crash. Finally, they emerged, said nothing, and drove off. The next day, a small sign appeared on our neighbor's front door, quarantined. Stay out by order of the health department. My sister and I asked the property manager what was going on. He just told us not to worry, everything was under control. Later that week, a for sale sign went up in our yard, courtesy of the landlord, giving us 30 days to vacate. To this day, I have no idea what really happened in that townhouse or who those men were. But sometimes when I recall the way that smell seeped through the walls and the sound of those muffled moans, I get chills. I still wonder if we slept night after night just a few feet away from something beyond horrifying.